Hey everybody, welcome back to part 7 of our ongoing discussion on memory. This time we're talking about long-term memory, more specifically encoding specificity. So to get an idea of how useful encoding specificity is, let's start off by talking about a concept called metamemory, which is something you probably haven't thought about, but you're definitely aware of, and we'll describe this. This is the awareness of our memory system and what we have stored there. Basically, we all have a pretty good sense of what we know and what we don't know, right? So if I ask you like what the capital of Spain is, you have a pretty good sense whether you have that information and can work to retrieve it, or if you have no idea, right? If I ask you, capitals of obscure countries, you might not know. You know immediately. Oh, I have no idea what that is. But if I ask you what the capital of the United States is, you say, yeah, okay, I know what that is immediately. So you have a feeling of knowing. Sometimes you can have what's called a tip of the tongue phenomenon, which is a temporary inaccessibility of a word in long-term memory. The feeling of knowing that comes with that is sort of a sense that we know something, but we can't really recall it. The really interesting thing is it's usually accurate. So if you think you know something and you just can't quite pull it up, you usually do know it. And with enough time, you can recall it, right? You do know what that is. You just can't quite pull it out. Some amnesic patients also maintain this feeling of knowing despite an inability to recall. So we're going to talk about exactly how that happens and how we can improve our ability to recall things. So here are some examples of things that might prompt a tip of the tongue phenomenon, that sort of metamemory feeling of that you know, but you can't remember what it's called. So a tube-shaped instrument that is rotated to produce complex symmetrical designs created by light shining through mirrors on the instrument. And what's that called? A word that reads the same way backwards as forward, like madam, right? Reads the same way forwards and backwards. A verb meaning to give up the throne. People who explore caves as a hobby or sport. Instance of making a discovery by a lucky accident. A building, usually stone, housing a large tomb or several tombs. So these are words that you probably know, but you can't quite pull up. I don't know. It varies from person to person. These didn't prompt tip of the tongue in me because I don't know. I think I just know what they are. But hopefully at least one of these makes you scratch your head for a second and say, what is that? I think I know what that is. Okay, so let's talk about encoding specificity. Having similar cues at encoding and retrieval leads to superior performance. A retrieval cue is a reminder that helps us recreate the learning experience. So the way that you think about information when you encode it impacts whether the retrieval cue will be helpful. So for example, not just encoding the word bridge, but encoding it like a structure to get across water will give you more cues to sort of retrieve what that is. Thinking about what the word is more richly, right? It will sort of give you more hooks to help recall. This is one of the reasons why I often give Greek roots for things when we are talking about especially neuroanatomical structure. So to use the kind of example we're working with here, I might tell you that pons means bridge, and that there are lots of rising sensory inputs that cross over in the pons. So remembering that pons means bridge might help you remember a little bit about what it does or where it is. The more richly you encode things, the more ways you think about things, the better our sort of memory will work. The better that our Greek goddess of mnemosiny will help us recall this information, right? So through this kind of mechanism, things can become associated. So you might hear a song on the radio that you associate with, an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, or a song that always played on the radio on your way to high school, right? Something that was popular at the time might become associated with certain memories. A song that your roommate might always sing would remind you of that roommate. Or maybe you might think of a place you lived when you were growing up. A similar cue at encoding, like playing, like let's say you played in front of a tree all the time when you were growing up. And if you walk by and see that tree or a tree that looks like it, it might prompt you to retrieve that memory. You might recall, playing with a sibling or something in the front yard with this big oak tree. When you walk past a big oak tree, you might think about that time, right? And you might not think about these things without the cue, right? You have a memory of playing with a sibling growing up, but it doesn't come up very often. Having a cue that prompts you to retrieve it will help you to retrieve that information. And the more cues that you have in common during your retrieval experience with your encoding experience, the easier recall is. And this can happen in even really weird examples. This is one of my favorite studies of encoding specificity. In this task, participants were asked to memorize a word list. Pretty standard, right? We've done that in this class a couple of times. But the trick is they were asked to memorize this either on land or underwater while wearing scuba equipment. Those are very different contexts. They were then asked to recall in either a congruent or an incongruent context, right? So either if they learned on land, they were tested on land or on water, and vice versa. We can see here that recall is good if encoding and recall happen in a similar location. So if you learn on land and you're tested on land, good performance. If you learn underwater and are tested underwater, good performance. However, performance is bad if recall and encoding are in different places or very, very different contexts. If you learn the words on land, you're bad at recalling them underwater, and learning the words underwater, you're bad at recalling them on land. So we best recall when our environment matches our encoding environment. This is one of the reasons why I encourage you to try to study in a very similar environment into which you will take tests, right? I don't say you need to go as far as to go into like a classroom and study in the seat you're going to be taking it in, but if you're going to be taking your test in a quiet environment with maybe just the sounds of, other people scratching pencils and that sort of thing, maybe don't study with, loud music or in a distracting environment, right? Try to match your study environment to your testing environment. Something I would do, and I'm not sure how much of a benefit this was, is I would drink strong smelling tea, like peppermint tea or something like that, and I would bring the same thing with me when I would take a test. It's just another kind of like retrieval cue to sort of help me spark recall. I don't know how much it helped, but I think it helped. So external contexts aren't the only things that matter. State-dependent learning is certainly a thing. The way you think about information when you encode it impacts how you retrieve it, and information in one state is best recalled in that state. This can apply to all sorts of things like your physiological state or how upset or how kind of emotions you're feeling, but it can also apply to drug-induced state, right? The way your internal context feels and the way you think in a certain state is a very, very powerful encoding and recall cue. So let's say, for example, you go out drinking one night and your friend teaches you a really cool new card game to play while you're drinking. It's got some complicated rules, but you end up having a lot of fun, and as a result, maybe you end up drinking quite a bit. So you had a great time, and you really like. So you go to a party maybe the next weekend, and you say, "Hey, I've got this great card game I played last weekend. Let's try that." And you bust out a deck of cards, and you can't remember the rules, right? You can't get it straight. You can't really describe it to anybody. You just keep forgetting too many details. And you say, you know what, forget it. Let's just do something else. I can't seem to remember the rules. So you have a couple drinks, and all of a sudden, things click, and you're the card master once again. You're able to remember a lot more rules that you were forgetting before, and you're able to explain the card game to everybody, and you have a great time. So why does that work? Well, why does context matter, be that external or your internal state? The more familiar cues that you have, the more likely you are to retrieve a piece of information, because we associate cues with a target at encoding. It's just something we sort of do automatically. And we can actually do it explicitly. It's one of the reasons why, rich, elaborative types of encoding, relating information to yourself or to other objects, is useful, right? It's a more rich way of encoding things. So let's say when you're encoding something like properties of a person, like the person's face, the sound of his voice, or perhaps, the sounds that make up their names, so you encode some auditory information, or their physical location, like maybe you met at Denny's, a really, really, really good restaurant. You encode all of those things together with your target memory. So then at retrieval, you have more things that you can use to recall. So perhaps you encounter this person in a different place, but you have encoded enough things about them, like what their face looks like and what their voice or their name sounds like, that when you see them again at retrieval, you have enough cues that you can pull that memory up once again. So we know that increasing your cues can aid in memory retrieval. This is the whole reason why we engage in spaced studying, right? Spacing out your learning distributes your learning better. It helps you retain information better and facilitates a recall of information. Distributed learning is better than massed learning, right? Just because of the richness of cues and the multiple sessions will help strengthen. So in this now famous experiment that we talk about all the time, we have participants that engaged in massed or distributed studying. Massed studying, they studied the list 8 times in one day. In distributed studying, they studied the same word list 2 times every day for 4 days. Then we have tests at 0, 1, and 7 days. Here we have the mean number of words recalled, and here we have the retention interval in the unit of days. And we see at first, massed and distributed studying produces similar results, right? Cramming for a test versus spacing your studying out will lead to pretty similar results initially. However, after just 1 day, distributed processing has an advantage over massed, right? We have a lot of information lost almost immediately. This continues. By 7 days, we've forgotten almost all of the words that we tried to cram in with our massed studying, but distributed studying has superior performance even 1 week later. So this is, for one, the whole reason why I have you do quizzes, right? I know that you'll remember things better if you are forced to engage with the material multiple times. The more times you study spread out, the more efficient the use of your study time is. So I really encourage you all to space your studying out as much as possible, not only for the sake of your sanity and doing well on the exams, but for your long-term retention of the material. Okay, that's it for this unit. Next time we are on to the neurobiology